Hello. I want to start by pointing out that my cat Leon and I were both in residence at the Van Oppen Museum in the Netherlands, and here's his badge. But we're here today to talk about Tamms, the supermax prison at the tip of southern Illinois, and the Tamms Year 10 campaign and related struggles. And I don't like to talk about Tamms without my comrades and collaborators, and so I'm so thrilled they're here. Thank you so much for having us. Tamms Supermax Prison at the tip of southern Illinois was designed for one thing: sensory deprivation, permanent solitary confinement, no phone calls, no contact visits, no communal activity, no yard, classroom, cafeteria, or chapel. Men never leave the cell except to exercise alone in a concrete pen or in a cage if they're mentally ill. Food is pushed through a slot in the cell door. Interaction and sensory stimulation are physiological needs. Without them, our brains go into crisis. When people break down in solitary, it's not because they are weak, it is because they are human. And indeed, because they're part of the animal kingdom. Most animals, but certainly all mammals, can't withstand cages or isolation without mental distress. Learning about this in the late 1990s, as a member of the Committee to End the Marion Lockdown, I asked myself, as an artist, how do I communicate the experience of long-term isolation, and what is my goal in doing it? In 2001, I organized Ask Me, where experts on various topics sat in wooden booths and answered your questions. The booths were based on Lucy's psychiatry booth. It was a live human installation with curated conversations, and one booth was Tamms Supermax Prison, and the experts were family members of the men in Tamms. Icebreaker questions were provided at each booth, and at the Tamms booth you could ask, what is the effect of sensory deprivation, and why would your loved one be called the worst of the worst? As another approach to this subject, I made an experimental video called Space Ghost. It's structured by a metaphor between outer space and prison, a comparison between outer space and prison, astronauts and prisoners. Why? To address the experience of isolation, sensory deprivation, and the reality of living in a separate parallel universe from your family, a common experience in this era of long prison sentences. The video has no statistics about prisons, no political proposals, no solutions, and no demands, just asking people to imagine long-term incarceration. Meanwhile, years passed and men were still in Tamms. The situation felt like a parable. There's an artist and there's a man in the bottom of the well. At what point does the artist, who knows so much about this man, become a bystander to his suffering? In 2006, a group of artists, poets, and musicians started the Tamms Poetry Committee to provide the men with some social contact. We sent poems, they sent poems. Bruce wrote back, "Hi committee, is this for real? I can't believe someone cares enough to send a pick-me-up to the worst of the worst." The men wrote about their hallucinations, psychosis, self-mutilation, and suicide attempts, all expected consequences of solitary confinement. One man finally wrote, "Hey, this poetry is great, but could you please tell the governor what they're doing to us down here?" So we looked at the three branches of government: judicial, executive, and legislative. And since lawsuits had been in place for 8 years already, and we didn't have much faith in our governor, Rod Blagojevich, that left the legislative branch. So we decided to pursue our state legislators and urge them to provide oversight at the Supermax. Therefore, in 2008, we earnestly launched Tamms Year 10, a legislative campaign to reform or close the Supermax at the 10-year anniversary of its opening. Men were originally supposed to be there for 1 year, but at this point, 1/3 of them had been there the entire decade. Prison reform is hard enough, but getting politicians to stand up for men labeled the worst of the worst was considered hopeless. Veteran attorneys scolded us that bringing attention to these guys would make things worse. The men felt they had nothing to lose. The campaign had 3 organizing principles. 1, recognize that we are bystanders to torture, but we don't have to be. 2, every event has a goal. Not permitted, just putting information out into the ether. Ask for a concrete political action and keep track of it. 3, let the men from Tamms speak for themselves. They can undo the myth of the worst of the worst. The men who spent time in Tamms and were now out were the key to the campaign's success. There's Daryl. They needed to carry on with their lives, but they took their time, a lot of time, to patiently educate us about every single detail of the place and to be key spokespeople, to be experts about Tamms. There's Johnny. They're both here today. Also at the time, no one was talking about solitary confinement or isolation, at least not in Illinois. It wasn't even a known phrase, really. These men are the ones who had to persuade audiences that this was an issue that they should embrace. When Pat Quinn became governor in 2009, we started hammering away at him. We did this mainly by working with state representatives who would apply pressure. We focused on decision makers and built relationships with good legislators by volunteering for them. So many people are extremely cynical about legislators and refuse to work with them or talk to them and avoid engaging with the system. But I'm the opposite. I see and have seen the very best in them. This is Senator Van Pelt, who we campaigned for very early on, and now she's a force of nature. She's passing second chance bills for people returning from prison. It was the men in her district who had come out of Tamms who rightly demanded that we help her. Okay, so back to the Tamms story. After working with state reps, we held hearings with 100 people attending. We introduced legislation, worked with great reporters who wrote incredible exposés, pulled in human rights monitors, and negotiated with the Department of Corrections. We organized lobby days, tactical media campaigns like this tremendous mud stenciling effort, and other cultural projects like the Tamms Year 10 performance, where we reenacted scenes from the campaign, playing ourselves. There's Johnny up there. There's Daryl up there. Supermax subscriptions was another project which allows you to donate frequent flyer miles to buy magazines for prisoners, thus sending your travel excess to people who never leave the cell. And photo requests from solitary. We invited men in isolation to request a photograph of anything at all, real or imagined, such as my auntie's house at 63rd and Marshfield, facing east at 2 p.m. A lovesick clown with a feather pen and a scroll. He got 3 of these. And actually, when I was in the Netherlands, I met the person who did the middle drawing, the middle photograph. Another one was my mom in front of a mansion with a Hummer and money on the ground. His mother had died while he was in Tamms, and he sent us the photo you see there. He said that grieving your mother in isolation is a form of anguish like no other. Willie asked for a photo of us holding a prayer vigil at Bald Knob Cross in southern Illinois, praying for his deliverance from Tamms and to be granted parole. Here it is. In order to take this photo, we caravanned 20 family members down to southern Illinois, wrote a litany for a prayer vigil, coordinated with the proprietor of Bald Knob Cross, and slogged through this insane bureaucracy to allow family members to be able to visit Tamms on short notice. But that's us. And last year, or 2 years ago actually, Willie was paroled after 36 years. And the next day, they put him on a Greyhound bus to Chicago, and he joined the campaign. That same week, we held a welcome home party where he talked about the photograph and ceremoniously marked himself as free. Tyrone, his request was to see Tamms Year 10. He said, I'd just like to be able to put the faces to the names we've seen over the years so the humanity of each can shine forth. A name on paper at the end of the day is still just a name on paper. We also made these same images into legislative action postcards, distributed them to all legislators. This is us filling them out for all legislators in one of the offices. And we even displayed them in the State House in the hallway, where we often were waiting to pounce on committee members coming out of these secret budget meetings about prison spending. People think of lobbying as appealing to your worst nature, the worst nature of a legislator, but Brenda appealed to their best nature. Lobbying, by the way, is when you seek to influence a politician, usually in a lobby. You often have to pull them off the floor while they're in session. How do you do that? You hand the doorman your business card, and they give it to the legislators, and then you push your way forward to talk to them when they come out. Here are me and Brenda surrounded by the guards union at one of the most tense times, and here we are talking to a skeptical rep. In 2009, we cracked the nut. Our governor appointed a new corrections chief to review the supermax as his first task. The governor said about Tamms, "Here's an issue that I take seriously." In reaction, the Chicago Tribune editorial board wrote a shoddy, factually incorrect, and asinine editorial about Tamms. To express our discontent, we picketed and delivered 10 corrections to the editorial board on stone tablets, which were stopped by security. But we did get a meeting with the board, and there's Johnny talking, and there's the editorial board listening. A few months later, the IDOC director announced a 10-point reform plan for Tamms. We didn't think it went far enough, but we were elated at the movement forward on this issue. We held a party on the right side of history to thank our brave and principled legislators who truly made this happen, because we pressured them, and to celebrate ourselves for years of hard work. Of course, we didn't know there were still years to come. This was 2009. When the 10-point plan stalled, for reasons I won't get into, we started a new push to cut Tamms out of the budget. In 2012, our governor proposed the outright closure of Tamms. However, the powerful guards union staged a fear-mongering campaign to keep it open for the jobs that they weren't actually losing. A prison designed for sensory deprivation that drives men to self-mutilation and suicide, they said, saves lives. This union was AFSCME, who MLK marched with in Memphis in 1968 with the message that workers' rights and human rights are inseparable. In response, the mothers lobbied in Springfield. These are their special lobbying cards. And they marched to AFSCME headquarters. They said, "My son is not a paycheck," and "Torture is a crime, not a career." Last year, after a long, painful battle, Governor Quinn shut the supermax down. We sent them in this card to their new prisons, drawn by a child whose dad was in Tamms. As you can see here, Tamms is being destroyed by a wrecking ball with aliens overhead. The men describe their journey back into the world of sensation. David wrote, "Our natural human senses, having been so repressed at Tamms, were suddenly and shockingly activated simply by boarding the IDOC bus. The smell of diesel fumes was overpowering, foreign yet familiar, comforting and nauseating." Juan said, "I can actually shake my neighbor's hand. It was surreal." Joe said, "When I first heard of the Tamms Poetry Committee, I thought I needed a poem like I needed a 25th hour a day in that box." Who would have known? We are now proudly working on Governor Quinn's reelection. Tamms would not be closed without Governor Quinn's courage and decisive action. The amazing thing is that he stuck with his decision in spite of immense pressure from the guards union and downstate legislators. Normally in Illinois, when a governor proposes to close a prison, it's just a cynical move to get the region up in arms, and then they eventually agree not to close it in exchange for a political support on some other issue. But Governor Quinn meant it, and he never wavered. When legislators, quote, found the money and put Tamms back in the budget, he line item vetoed it right out. That's why when we lobbied in Springfield, we always stopped by his office and thanked him. And here are family members delivering flowers. None of us sacrificed as much as the governor or the head of the DOC to make this happen. They stuck their necks out, and it's certainly affecting his reelection. In fact, all his Republican opponents in the gubernatorial race, ran on the platform to reopen Tamms. The most amazing thing is seeing the Department of Corrections defend the men from Tamms. The department is now sticking up for them after demonizing them in the press for years. You can see here they're actually running corrections. The Department of Corrections disputed their claim that Tamms is a safety valve for the system. The IDOC said Tamms served no such function, and it was closed because it was not needed. They even defend the men from Tamms, saying they've not caused any problems. If anything, they're better than the rest of the population. It's a reversal that proves that any reversal is possible. Prison policies are political. When we ask elected officials to make courageous decisions, we need to be prepared to back them. We are very invested in this election. Here is Raul during the closure campaign, our only dad on the campaign. His son had already left Tamms 2 years earlier, but the family was and is still active. Here he is with his wife, Griselda, on their 27th anniversary, volunteering for Governor Quinn. What he did is deeply felt. Here's the Gov at his birthday party fundraiser with 2 moms and me, and I'm wearing this button because I love the Gov. And you should come volunteer this year in Illinois, and help us with his reelection. Willie Sutton said he robbed banks because that's where the money is. We have tried to work with governments because they are the ones who control the prison system. State government is a good target. It's easy to find good public servants who need your support to do the right thing. It's a small pond, and it's the right pond if you're trying to influence the state prison system. The decisions made there define a person's life, the life of their family, their community, and their generation. Who can afford to relinquish this territory? Artists are uniquely qualified to change law and policy. They're used to attempting the impossible and doing it with no time or money. They're used to failing and starting all over again. They're free in the existential sense, in the world, but not of it. Those of us taken with existentialism, nonsense, and theater of the absurd are especially positioned to relish the legislative arts. Here's a sequence on my phone from a day at the State House. That's Janice at her state senator's desk. He's never there, but always allows constituents to take a photo behind his desk. Next, I texted a lobbyist who sometimes takes an hour to walk around with us to find out where he was. He sent back a photo of a honey bun. And this next thing was a die-in protest from a group rightly opposing school closings. And then we go to Cheesecake Day in the comptroller's office with the most popular Republican in the state, comptroller Judy Bartopinka. Another example. This is our depiction in a performance we did of a meeting with the IDOC back in 2008 down at Tamms, which is 6.5 hours from Chicago. Our entire group was visiting the prison with a state legislator. We planned it for months, spent like $2,000 getting ourselves down there and in hotels, and we were even driven to the prison by the Department of Corrections. Then a state helicopter came down and said we couldn't enter. So instead, we met with them for hours and hours and hours. And in the conversation depicted here, we were talking about the seriously mentally ill men at Tamms, like people with schizophrenia. They were in a so-called special treatment unit, which we knew was just as isolated. They were claiming that the men in that unit can play Monopoly together, just sitting around a table, just like we're sitting here. That's what they kept saying. Just like we're sitting here, they can play Monopoly. But they failed to mention, and we pointed out, that the men do not sit just like we're sitting here. They're actually in plexiglass cages the size of phone booths. So in the game of Monopoly they used to play with these guys at Tamms, a mental health worker rolls the dice and moves the pieces. The men sit in these cages. I sometimes say this to artists, but this work does not deny you any of the indeterminacy, collaboration, authorship, or brushes with the uncanny that art provides. On the contrary, it can be a way to find it. But it's a lot of paperwork. It's so right that the Tamms Year 10 office, filled with 5 years of files, fact sheets, and ephemera, was an art exhibition at the Sullivan Galleries. It served as the hub of the closure campaign, on view and in action, with no division between art and politics. As artists with real-world political goals, we needed to engage with government systems. That's legislative art. Prison policies are made by the state, so you go to the state to change them. I'm enthusiastic about legislative art because it's engaging, unpredictable, and rewarding. but mainly because it's necessary. Since Tamms closed, we've been advocating for these men at their new prisons, which has been very difficult because we have some extremely terrible conditions. We've been expanding the photo project to New York and California and planning a variety show about prison called the Honey Bun Comedy Hour. The Honey Bun Comedy Hour, named after the notorious packaged sweet, is a variety show to depict the horror, boredom, and small mercies of prison life. The honey bun is one of the rare joys in prison, but also an addiction and a form of currency that can lead to violence and chaos. There are honey bun bankers. Inspired by Brechtian epic theater and Boal's Theater of the Oppressed, the skits and reenactments will illustrate particularly senseless or cruel policies. For example, Denise drives 6 hours to see her husband and is refused a non-contact visit after they discover a butter knife in her trunk. Janice gets a phone call by a person eating a sandwich. "Miss Burnham, your brother died." "Pick up the body today, or we cremate." Faggy, who has schizophrenia, tries to hang himself and gets a bill for $5.30 for the sheet he damaged. In addition to reenactments, there will be dozens of other segments, such as prisoner soliloquies, warden monologues, best bureaucrat award, bad bill of the month, tales from under the bus. Those are people in prison that advocates consider too unsympathetic to advocate for, like people with sex offenses. This is also a venue for confronting the extremely negative culture that staff and prisoners co-create and endure. Mostly the staff creates it, just to be clear. A recent letter from one of the former Tamms guys in prison has a great honey bun segment. So, people in prison can't just give each other something, like a honey bun, or it would be considered trading and trafficking. So his segment is entitled, "A List of Ways That One Prisoner Could Show Another an Act of Kindness Without Getting a Ticket," including extending your greeting or best wishes to them, sharing info with them that they're unaware of, giving them encouragement to keep striving, and the best one, spending time with them. Don't you think that's funny? I mean, that's the punishment, is that they have to be in prison and spend time. So anyway, shown together, this is a variety show, but these individual sketches will be used in many advocacy campaigns to target these particularly senseless policies. We'll show single segments to individual decision makers, to say a legislator at church, a warden in his office, or to lawmakers in Springfield. And if that doesn't work, we may show it to those who influence decision makers in agency meetings, cable access, or political blogs, anywhere they are needed to influence policy and public opinion. In doing legislative work, we focused on strategy and made sure that our tactics were designed to move decision makers or those who influence them towards our goal. If we weren't doing that, there would be no purpose in doing a tactic. We were oppositional when we needed to be, when there was no alternative. But if we didn't have to be, we used the saying of Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu, "Build a golden bridge for your opponent to retreat over." Honey Bun Comedy Hour will actually have segments to discuss strategy, and will feature this and other proverbs that we've used on the campaign, such as romanticize hard work, meetings are not work, only work is work. You know it's work because people have to be persuaded to do it. If you don't want to do something, one excuse is as good as another. And more proverbs. You may get further working with reformers in the system than throwing rocks at their window. And don't romanticize or demonize prisoners, family members, activists, corrections officials, or politicians. All paths are knowable, all paths are changeable. And the most important, we are all animals. When legislators stoke the public sphere of crime, you, me, all of us are the main target audiences. That's how these policies happen, even though crime rates are and have been steadily going down. Politicians and the media play out fantasies of vengeance and then inscribe them into law. That's why it's especially important for the public to be informed and active in current criminal justice policy. Here's a project designed to help reorient people to what we're doing in corrections these days. It's called SAS Cell PC. Select the appropriate sentence, cell, and prison conditions. You learn about a crime and choose the appropriate sentencing and prison conditions. Then you're asked to imagine that your own child committed the offense, and then you get to make choices based on what you think he or she should go through in the criminal justice system. You can even choose the cell type. Early anecdotal research shows that for strangers, people select very long sentences, harsh prisons, and public registries for every crime. When it's their child, no public registries, no mandatory sentences, lots of education and treatment. That's because when it isn't their child, it's a theoretical other who people feel they know through what's called a category error, the feeling you know someone because you've seen representations of them, probably in the media. We said from the beginning that the challenge of Tamms Year 10 was deconstructing the notion of the worst of the worst. This shortcut for dehumanizing people and dismissing their human rights allowed the return of isolation, a practice that was all but shunned for 100 years in US correctional history because of the known cruelty and mental damage it caused. Because we let it, long-term isolation has become a new normal feature of incarceration. Used for youth, people with mental illness, LGBTQ people, women, immigrants, jailhouse lawyers, political prisoners, military detainees like Chelsea Manning, and just ordinary rule breakers. But it's wrong for any reason. In 2011, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture called for a global ban on any solitary lasting over 15 days. We've made colossal investments in policies to socially exclude huge categories of people from our society, literally from having human contact. Over the past 15 years, this same reckless demonization and erasure of social being has been focused on another net of people, a new worst of the worst. As we lament, and that's people with sex offenses, as we lament our bad policies of the past, and they come into focus as something wrong, as an error, as the wrong path that we took. We must not forget the ones we're doing in the present. Where the demonization is still so fresh, it remains appealing and difficult to question. What's missing from all these discussions with policymakers and with each other is evidence about what works and what doesn't, and also the insights from the millions of Americans and their families who experience these policies, or of course any prison time. There's no point in having me talk about the Tamms struggle unless you can hear from the men who experienced it. And that's what we will do right now. It's my great honor to introduce Johnny Walton and Daryl Cannon, two people who have done more than anyone I know to advance our understanding of solitary confinement and life in prison to legislators, policymakers, corrections officials, reporters, fellow prisoners, and members of the public alike. These men and their colleagues know more about the Illinois prison system and how it developed than anyone working in corrections. Johnny and Daryl have both spoken at countless hearings, meetings, and events, and it's an understatement to say that the campaign would not have been successful without them. I don't know two more engaged and productive community members, and I can't say enough about these two gentlemen and how proud I am to share the stage with them. So I'll introduce them one at a time, and they'll come out and talk. So we'll start with Johnny. Johnny wrote us when we were still the Tamms Poetry Committee and politely informed us what we were doing wrong. Within a day of his release from prison, after he overturned his own conviction with a federal habeas claim, which took him 17 years, but he did it, he managed to get himself to the Tamms Year 10 blues benefit at the Hideout, got on stage, and gave one of the most rousing 5-minute speeches I've heard before or since. Since we don't have a very good picture of that, here he was the next year. This was after 5 years in Tamms and 22 in prison. He has not stopped since, crossing the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois to educate people about Tamms and why it must be closed. Even while in prison, he started his work to renounce gang violence and has continued by educating at-risk youth. As a volunteer social worker at Central State Services, for 5 years, he has helped senior citizens. And for the past 2 years, he has worked in the Lawndale community for Neighborhood Housing Services, a nonprofit that renovates abandoned and deteriorated houses and helps get poor people the financing to own their own home, sometimes getting houses back to people who lost them in the mortgage crisis. They rehabilitate whole neighborhoods with clothing and food drives and build community with neighborhood cleanups. I know this because he gets us to volunteer, and they are amazing. Oops, what happened? Well, I guess we can't see that. Johnny has been a pillar of strength for Tamms Year 10 through years of meetings, campaigning, lobbying, and watching this issue change and us make progress in ways we never initially could have dreamed of. May I present Johnny Walton.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I can't see anyone because of the bright light. I was going to figure out which I turn left or right, like it was in a lineup. But this is a very serious issue here. This is no laughing matter. So I'm not going to make a lot of jokes about it. My name is Johnny Walton, and I'm a former Tamms supermaximum prison inmate. I had a natural life sentence, as Laurie Jo mentioned, and the judge said you would go from Tamms to the graveyard. And I said, no, I'm not. I got into my law books and I studied until my eyes got bad. I could hardly see. And for 17 years, I fought. The last 5 years, I was placed in Tamms because somehow the Department of Corrections got the notice that I was about to be released. They say this man, which I use my mind a lot, so they say this man is dangerous. We can't release him. I wasn't placed in Tamms for any violent crimes or assaults on police officers or guards or anything else. I was placed in Tamms because of who I am and the way I speak and the way I've been speaking in the streets. And I am imploring the people here now, look at the example that people took from Arizona with people power and power of the purse. They stopped the legislators in Arizona in their tracks. You got to get some power. We must get some power. We must use what we got. We just can't come here and say, okay, I'm going to leave here feeling good or feeling bad or with no feeling at all. We have to leave here with something on our mind. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Laurie Jo. Like she said, they wrote me in Tamms about a poetry committee. I said, have y'all lost your mind? What am I going to do with a poetry committee? I'm suffering because Tamms, supermax, any supermax, not just Tamms, and Tamms got their ideas from California, Pelican Bay, and stuff like that. Any supermax is designed to drive you crazy. If you're in a little cage for 24 hours a day, because some people don't even come out for that 1 hour because it's so stressful. You in that cage and you're pacing back and forth. You have nothing to do. I was just so blessed that I had sent to the medical thing and the mental health issues in the library and got books to read. So that occupied my mind. But a lot of people, they don't have anything. So they suffer day in and day out. You see, we just can't explain how people they got pods where men have been there so long and have been deprived so long, they're starting to mutilate themselves, cut themselves open, cut off their private parts. That's powerful, that's strong. when you got a man that can do that to themselves. And like I said, it was designed to drive you crazy. Because if you watch a lion in a cage, they pace back and forth. They turn at the one side, go back to the other side. That's stress. They're trying to walk off that stress. And anytime you place a person in that type of confinement with no communication, you got men that they will mutilate themselves just to get to the hospital so they can see somebody, to talk to somebody. They cut their wrists just to get to the hospital. I know. I spent 5 years in Tamms, and the only thing that saved me from being completely out of it was that my conviction was overturned, and I fought for 5 years after it was overturned in Tamms. And I kept saying to myself, I'm coming out of this. I'm coming out of this. I'm coming out of this. Now, you guys have saw the videos and the pictures of how we went to Springfield. We lobbied. We talked to legislators. And you got some legislators say, oh, come on, they deserve what they got. But then you have to look at that small percentage of people that have their convictions overturned. They have been convicted illegally. They're going to tell you about it, how they tortured him when he come out. They'd have their convictions overturned. They have been found innocent. They have been given a few pennies. And some of them don't even get an I'm sorry. But I want to get this point across to the people that's here that have some power or that can do anything with the law to stay in it, because little young college kids helped me also. They came in their projects and stayed with it and said, we're going to help you. We're going to do whatever we can. And they would send me little books. They would send me little ideas on how to move, what to do next, because my lawyers threw up their hands. Public defenders, they threw up their hands. We through. We could do no more. But I fought on and on. And that's the name of the game here. The name of the game is to fight. Fight for what you believe in. Keep fighting. Stand up. And like I said, you saw Laurie Jo made her presentation. You saw a lot of stuff that we've done, and the battle it's not over, because you're going to find people that they got people out there that's completely evil. They're going to do whatever they can to put their foot on your neck. And it just happens to be people like myself that they've done it. And like I said, my conviction was overturned. I was, no violence, no nothing, conviction overturned. And I told the townspeople when they come for me, I said, you come for me 20 years too late. I used to be a bad guy 30, 40 years ago. I'm sitting here now, haven't done anything in 20 years, but they come and say, we got to have you. And I just want to let you know that it's horrible. The situations in these supermaximum prisons is horrible. And if you got people that are suffering like that haven't done anything, because if you looked on that board, 3/4 of the people that you saw were senior citizens such as myself in Tamms. They closed it down because they couldn't, having 250 people in the 500 capacity prison made no sense. A lot of stuff we fought hard to do, and we made them just say, okay, we give. We give. So that's what you got. I'm just sitting here to say one last thing. Fight until you can't fight no more and make them say, we quit. We give. You win. Make them say you win.
Oh, got my image back. Daryl was tortured into a murder confession by the Chicago police as part of a torture ring covered up for decades, still being unraveled. While in prison, he spent his last 9 years in Tamms. After a 24-year fight, his conviction was overturned, and I'm told that he gave his attorneys a lot of strategy advice for achieving this incredibly difficult feat. Once out, he became an extraordinary spokesperson against both the unofficial torture by Chicago police and state-sanctioned torture by our Department of Corrections. I called him as soon as he got out of prison, and he talked to me for 3 hours, describing every detail, answering every question, and telling me things I never thought to ask. As a manager for Ceasefire, which is a violence prevention program in Chicago, he prevented and interrupted violence on the streets. The police assigned the beats, and he was given the 2 most dangerous beats in Woodlawn, a South Side neighborhood which had a homicide every 2 to 3 weeks. After he took over, violence plummeted, and there were 0 homicides for a stretch of 10 months. Because he was so successful and outshone the police department, the mayor just recently cut the funding. He's now been offered a position as a supervisor for Ceasefire in Rockford, Illinois. It's my pleasure to introduce Daryl Cannon.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, give all honors to God, and I thank you for being tentative as you have been to hear things that you may not have heard before. Yes, I'm a victim, beyond a shadow of a doubt, on 2 different fronts. First, in being tortured by Chicago police. I was handcuffed behind my back. They used the electric caliper on me, in which they shocked me, my testicles, they put it in my mouth. They hung me by my handcuffs, which was cuffed behind my back. Throughout the day, my name was never Daryl Cannon. My name was always nigger. Nigger this, nigger that. And for once in my life, I came to understand what people in the South felt when the Klan were terrorizing down there. I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. I knew nothing about racism until I became a teenager and got out on my own. Nevertheless, my experience with the Chicago Police Department is one that I would never in my life forget, because they did despicable things to me that you wouldn't think that police officers would do. Now, outside of that, I went to prison for a crime that I did not commit. I had no witnesses, no evidence against me. Instead, they had a forced confession implicating me in a murder that I knew nothing about. But these particular detectives would not take no for an answer. They had a reputation of anyone that they arrested, you were guilty. Either you did it this time or you did something before and you got away with it. And so you were going to confess to something before they finished with you. I endured over 6 hours of being tortured. They beat me on my knee with a flashlight, swelled up my knee. I mean, it was despicable. And to this day, the city of Chicago has yet to apologize to me. I did 24 years in prison. Out of the last 24 years, 9 of those years was did in Tamms supermax. Not because I did anything wrong, but because according to the Department of Correction, I pose a threat. I pose a threat because of the fact that I was once a gang chief. I was well respected in prison, and they felt that with the new Get Tough policy, Daryl Cannon may choose to get violent, and if he chooses to get violent, a lot of other people will get violent too. So therefore, they sent me to Tamms Supermax within the first 30 days that it opened. Tamms has no redeeming value whatsoever. Tamms was created by a psychiatrist, and it was created with the purpose of breaking you mentally, physically, and spiritually. But fortunately for me, the passing of my mother, my grandmother, their spirits was embodied in me. And so Daryl Cannon became one stubborn son of a gun. I refused to be broken. Now, my 9 years in Tamms was more than a nightmare. My cell consists of a bed that was a concrete block. And that concrete block is what I had to sleep on 7 days a week. The mattress was so thin, a phone book is probably thicker than the mattress that I had to sleep on. I'm from the city, born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. But in Tamms, I've seen things in Tamms that scared the living daylights out of me. I've seen spiders down there that I didn't even know exist, except maybe in a horror movie. You know, but these are all the things that you have to endure while you're in Tamms. And I've seen my colleague Johnny talked about some of the people that tried to commit suicide. I have been on a wing, that's what they call it, in which they have had to bring people out who tried to commit suicide, and you see the blood coming all down from here, or the blood in the middle part of their genesis where they have tried to cut themselves, anything to mutilate themselves to get out of that cell to get to another area. Now, anytime a man gets to the point that he's willing to inflict physical pain upon himself just to get out of that area to go to a new area, something is wrong. Now, I have always said, and I'll continue to say, all of us that was in Tamms was not going to be there forever. At some point in time, we was going to come back to the community. And in coming back to the community, the slightest thing could set you off and make you commit mayhem. Why? Not because you're bad, but because of what you have experienced and had to endure while being in Tamms. Tamms teaches you one thing: suppress your hostility. Why? Because you're not going to hurt the officers. The way that Tamms is designed, you cannot hurt staff, period. And if you say anything that they feel is smart, you will get a ticket. And if you get a ticket, that means you don't have a TV or a radio for maybe 6 months to a year. Tamms is so diabolical, even when you get magazines. If there are staples in the middle of your magazines, Tamms take the staples out. So when you get your magazine, if you hold your magazine up, all the pages fall out. Why? All a part of trying to break you mentally and physically. Tamms has a policy where at nighttime, they will come in every hour on the hour and cut the master switch on. That cuts the lights on in your cell. They come around. If that doesn't wake you up, when they leave the wing, the door will slam so hard that it'll echo. So you're going to wake up. It's all a part of sleep deprivation. This is all a part of the game. So I was happy to be able to testify. In doing 24 years in prison, would you believe that one day I still had appeals pending? I went back to trial 2 separate times and got 2 new trials, and each time I was reconvicted. I was reconvicted because of the fact that they put me in front of a judge who happened to be an ex-prosecutor, and his allegiance was to the state's attorney's office, and his allegiance was to the police. So I was reconvicted every time. I've never had a bench trial. I always took a jury trial. But yet and still, the crucial evidence of me being able to ask the officers, have you ever engaged in police brutality? Had there ever been complaints on you? All judges precluded me from doing that. Like my brother Johnny, I became a certified paralegal. And I made it my business that everything that my lawyers did, we did together. Nothing was filed without me proofreading it and stamping my approval on there. Again, thanks to the spirit of my mother, my grandmother, Daryl Cannon was able to survive Tamms. I don't smoke cigarettes. I don't drink coffee. I don't have a nervous condition, but they did find arsenic in my liver. Tamms was slowly poisoning me to death. If you ask me, how do I feel? I have nothing but hatred for those who tortured me. I have nothing but hatred for those who incarcerated me in Tamms. During that time, I lost all my family. During them 9 years, my mother, my father, my brother, my son, I lost all of them to the death angels. And not one time was I ever allowed to go back to their funerals to touch them one more time, because Tamms meant to break Daryl Cannon. But Daryl Cannon stands before you today a very proud man that he survived hell on earth. And because of that, I continue to speak about the atrocities of the criminal justice system, about Tamms, and about those who are silent about the injustices that we face every day. All of you are either of age right now to vote, or you will be very soon. Please get involved. Don't be silent. Do not allow the system to break you in terms of not wanting to be involved. Because if I had sat back and not fought for 24 years, Daryl Cannon wouldn't be here today. Do you know that the state's attorney's office went in court and told the judge, we're dropping all charges against Daryl Cannon after 24 years? That's ridiculous. But nevertheless, conditions will change, and we will persevere throughout all this hell that we have had to experience, and we shall be successful, and we will get our point across to society, and society will help us make a difference. And again, I thank you on behalf of me, Laurie Jo, and Johnny Walton for being attentive to us as you have. And God willing, we have made a difference, and I thank you.